Okay, so Logan coming out this weekend. We already did a review on it. It's great. You guys have to go see it. But just in case, I don't want you guys to be like intimidated by like 17 years worth of Wolverine movies. So going into Logan, here's just a real kind of quick and dirty presentation about where Wolverine is at this point going into Logan, which you will see this weekend.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. First up is the very first X-Men movie. It is set in 2003. In X-Men, we have Wolverine wandering around Canada with no memory of who he is, how he got these rad claws, literally cage fighting for money. It's pretty cool. But then at the end of X-Men, they go through all this adventure. He finds the X-Men, he gets family. Yay, I'm happy-ish now. I don't know. Anyway, Charles sends him to Professor X, sends him up to this abandoned military complex called Alkali Lake that's up in Canada because he's like, you might find some answers there about who you are. Then we go to X-Men 2, which is set in also 2003. X-Men 2 picks up right where X-Men 1 leaves off. He shows up in Canada. He's at the abandoned military place. He like stares down a wolf. I don't know, he's like into nature. But anyway, point is, he doesn't really find anything up there until the end of the movie when they have to go back to Alkali Lake to rescue Charles from this dude, William Stryker. They like have to blow up the base and the dam is exploding. Then Jean Grey kind of sort of becomes the Phoenix or something. But anyway, she sacrifices herself to save the rest of the X-Men. And at this point, you know, Logan's really bummed about that. Because like, hey, I was kind of in love with her. Like, this is a drag. So, end of X-Men 2, it's a drag that Jean Grey died. So, X-Men 3. The Last Stand. In X-Men 3 Last Stand, it is set in 2006. Wolverine still hanging out with the X-Men. He's kind of like a big brother to everybody at this point. Still super bummed out about Jean Grey. But then Jean Grey shows back up as the Phoenix and starts killing people, right? She kills Cyclops. She even like disintegrates Charles at some, like Charles literally disintegrates. It's crazy. So now Logan ends up at the end of X-Men Last Stand having to stab Jean Grey to death. Because of his healing factor, he's like half disintegrating, but then like struggling against it, has to stab her to death, right? So he kills Jean Grey at the end of X-Men 3. So now he's like, he was real sad here, but like, now he's like, real sad. So that's 2006. But then also at the end of this movie, like Charles sort of wakes up in somebody else's body. So he's not totally dead, but that doesn't matter at all, that Charles Xavier is back in here, which I'll get to in just one second. So after X-Men Last Stand, we get X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, X-Men Last Stand, big pile of shit. It's a real bad movie, right? But X-Men Origins Wolverine is like off the shit charts. Like, it's real bad. But what it does reveal is that Logan was born way back here, boop, in 1832. Because his healing factor, he doesn't really age, and you know they mentioned that in the first X-Men movie. There's no telling how old he is. Turns out he's this old. So in 1832 he's born. Then up here, a couple years later, 1845 is when his powers first manifest, because mutants, their powers don't manifest until they're like teenagers, because being a mutant is kind of like an allegory for puberty. So, you know, the coming of age, they're getting their powers, etc. and so forth. In Logan's case, totally accidentally kills his dad. Logan kills Pops. How about that? So he kills his Pops back in 1845 and runs away with his half-brother, Victor Creed, who turns out to be Sabretooth. So then, literally in just the title sequence of X-Men Origins Wolverine, we see them fighting in the Civil War. Then we flash forward to, you know, let's see, 2003, 1960, here-ish, fighting in World War I. Then, like, 1944, they're in D-Day. So Wolverine has gone through all of this stuff. Kills his Pops, fights in the Civil War, fights in World War I, fights in D-Day, and then, like, call it 1970, he's in Vietnam. And this, I wrote Vietman, Vietnam. So in 1970, in Vietnam, this is where he first meets William Stryker, who's the guy who ultimately gives him his rad metal claws, the adamantium skeleton stuff. He recruits them into this thing called Team X, which is like this sort of covert secret ops mutants team that features the first and very shitty version of Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. That happens here in 1970. So here in 1979, he has resigned to being a sexy lumberjack in Canada But of course that's not meant to last. Stryker comes back, basically like tricks him into signing up for the adamantium claw thing, and that's when he gets the whole metal skeleton and the claws and all that good stuff. Well, he's had the claws, but they're bone claws, right? It's gross looking. I don't like it. So then by the end of this movie, he gets shot in the head with an adamantium bullet, and that's how he loses his memory. So he loses his memory here in 1979. So like technically from here to here is the wandering around Canada as a cage fighter era of Wolverine, which feels longer than it should be, because that's 24 years is a long time for cage fighting. So now we've got X-Men First Class. This takes place in 1962, right here. And Wolverine's basically only got a cameo in this. In fact, he's only got one line. This movie is the one that's about Professor X, Charles, and Eric, who is Magneto. They get together when they're younger and they start the X-Men, essentially. And then they basically save the world from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Bay of Pigs happens and it's totally mutants. Anyway, point is, Wolverine's only got a cameo. Charles and Eric are out recruiting and they stumble onto him in a bar and he says, "Go f*** yourself." And that's it. 1962 was somewhere between World War II and Vietnam, so I guess that checks out. He could have just been floating around, hanging out in bars, smoking cigars, and telling people to go f*** themselves. That's all fine. Then, the next movie that gets made is The Wolverine. And The Wolverine is James Mangold, who directed Logan. It's his first attempt at a Wolverine movie. Wolverine opens in 1945 in Nagasaki. So he was in D-Day in the European theater in 1944, but then in Nagasaki in 1945 just in time for the bomb to be dropped on Nagasaki, which, as far as I can tell, I'm no historian, that didn't happen. Dudes didn't hop back and forth between Europe and Japan in those days. Anyway, whatever. So then that's where it opens, and that's kind of a flashback, and he wakes up from his dream here in 2013, The Wolverine. So in 2013, he is like a hermit. He's got a gnarly beard. He's like sleeping in a cave in Canada somewhere, kind of the opposite of sexy Canada lumberjack. So now he's like not sexy homeless Canadian guy, but he's still having dreams about Jean Grey, because now this is just 7 years here from the time he stabbed Jean Grey to death. So like it's been 7 years for us watching movies where different stuff is happening, but really what just happened for him is 7 years worth of like Canadian bum-itude having dreams about Jean Grey, who's wearing like kind of a sexy slip, but I think it's probably just like fancy pajamas. But then he gets tracked down by this super rich Japanese dude, the Japanese dude that he saved from the nuclear blast in 1945. Between 1945 and 2013, this Japanese dude becomes like this big, rich industrialist. Now he's dying, so he tracks down Wolverine because he saw him heal from the nuclear blast, and he's like, I want that. I want that power. And it ends with Wolverine getting his adamantium claws chopped off, and like his healing power kind of getting sucked out of his claw holes. It's a little weird. But it works out fine for him in the end. Anyway, by the end of the Wolverine, he still has his metal skeleton, but no more metal claws. Back to the bone claws here in 2013. Also at the end of the Wolverine, the post-credit scene, Charles Xavier shows back up, like in his Patrick Stewart body. It's like, but you got like totally disintegrated. Like, how did that work? If he got a brand new body, why is he still in a wheelchair? Like, wouldn't he just get a body that can walk? So then the next movie after X-Men Wolverine is X-Men Days of Future Past, and this is where it starts to get a little juicy. So, Days of Future Past starts out in 2023, and at this point, this title, like I know what all these words mean, but when you put them all together, like what the hell is that? But X-Men Days of Future Past takes place in 2023. There are Sentinels, which have long been part of X-Men lore, but have never been in the movies. Sentinels show up, they're killing off all the mutants. It's bad news. It's like post-apocalyptic New York. It looks really nasty. So what they do is they send Wolverine's consciousness back to Wolverine's body in... Boop, and I'm running out of room here, so this line's going to be long. 1973. So Days of Future Past goes from 2023, they send his consciousness back to 1973 to prevent Mystique from killing this guy Trask, who invents the Sentinels, that's wiping everybody out here. So the future turns out better for everybody. Long story short, it works, right? So this whole timeline right here again, this is where it gets juicy. This whole timeline, none of it happened. Not even the sexy lumberjack in Canada. X-Men Origins, Wolverine, never happened. Last Stand, never happened. None of it ever happens. At the end of Days of Future Past, Wolverine wakes up, it's a sunny day, and Beast is still alive, and Jean is still alive, and Cyclops is still alive. So, after they change 1973, whoop, it goes down here to like all of this other stuff where none of this happened. Maybe it is a splinter timeline, kind of like this, like I've drawn so eloquently here. I personally think they just rewrote this one and like most of this didn't happen. Now there is a conversation in the middle of Days of Future Past where Beast is like, I don't know, maybe there's a theory about time like a river and you can throw a rock in the river and it like creates ripples, but then it comes back together a little bit and then everything kind of stays the same anyway. So some of this might have happened, but that feels like a cop-out. Mostly this feels like, hey fans, sorry about these two movies. Let's forget about it, because we don't need to worry about it anymore. Except for anything that happened over here. All this, still canon. Thank you. Either way, let's move on to the next movie, which is X-Men Apocalypse. This takes place mostly in this version of 1983. This is another X-Men movie where Wolverine just kind of has a cameo. So in this one, the kid, the young versions of Cyclops and Jean Grey actually end up at Alkali Lake again, at William Stryker's base, and then they release Wolverine from his experiment where he's got the claws, right? He's got the metal skeleton, he's got the metal claws, which is crazy because here's the thing that I forgot to mention, and this is why it gets juicy. Also at the end of Days of Future Past, here in the 70s, like Wolverine got like tied up with a bunch of metal and tossed into a river, right? So he's like drowning at the bottom of a river, technically, and he gets fished out of the river by young William Stryker. But the eyes flash yellow, and that's an indication that it's not actually William Stryker, it's Mystique posing as William Stryker. So Mystique fishes Wolverine out of the river, essentially. But here in X-Men Apocalypse, he's with real William Stryker getting the real metal skeleton thing. That's exactly right. That's the correct response to that. Because like, how did he end up from fake William Stryker with actual William Stryker anyway? Maybe this is the pebble in the river kind of thing happening. They're like, whatever. Point is, here in 1983, young Cyclops, young Jean Grey released the Wolverine, right? So, which is already a different thing because they never meet the Wolverine until 2003 in this timeline, but now they've met him here in 1983. A little bit creepy because it's like teenager Jean Grey and like sexy lumberjack Wolverine at this point. And it's like they have a weird little moment. And it's like, don't do that. You don't want to do that. I should also write down that here in the new 2023, at the end of Days of Future Past, I'm going to call this Days of Future Sunny Days. So here's 2023, the end of Days of Future Past. Everybody's all happy and back to life. Now we go to Logan, which is here in 2029. A mere 6 years after the Days of Future Sunny Days. And then now Logan, all the mutants are dead. It's a drag. The world of Logan in 2029 is a real bummer, as opposed to the real opposite bummer of Days of Future Sunny Days here in 2023. So again, this is a 6-year period where like a lot of gnarly went down. The other thing about Logan is they say that mutants haven't been born. A mutant hasn't been born in 20 years. Let's call it Last Mutant Born. Which would kind of make sense because then they would be like 13 or 14 years old here. And since mutants don't show their powers until they're teenagers anyway, they would, in 2023, they would start realizing that no new mutants have been born. So that's, you know, that could all be happening here in 6 years and everything goes real south. But also in Logan, they talk about how Logan used to be a cage fighter. And they refer to Statue of Liberty, which was the set piece at the end of X-Men. Clearly, some of this made it down here. But either way, all of this to say that Logan, who was born James, did I tell you that? His real name is James Howlett. It is kind of half important. Logan / James Howlett / Wolverine, born in 1832. Then he lives all the way to 2023. Then he's got to go back to 1973. And then he lives all the way to 2029 again by the time he's Logan. So physically, he's only got the miles on him for 1832 to 2029. So at this point, he's, what is that, 196? But emotionally, he's gone from 1832 to 2023, back to 1973, and then all the way to 2029. Emotionally, he's actually 252. And he's seen all of his friends die like twice. So that's where he's at, going into Logan. Oh, and he's got to take care of a little girl all of a sudden. Everybody ready to go see Logan?
Yes.
I'm gonna go see it again, probably. Let's go right now. Let's go. I wouldn't mind seeing the like When Harry Met Sally style early '90s rom-com. Like if we could go like right here, like 1992, when Logan meets Jean, and that would be a great movie.
Vaporizing everybody.
Exactly. She's in a deli and she vaporizes everybody because she's making a point about faking orgasms. That would be amazing.